Do you know what? You know the what group the police likes it?
What?
You don't know the rock group the police?
Oh, the rock group. Yes, yes.
Okay, see that generation, that generation.
So you thought I was much older than that, didn't you?
We good? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna be in trouble. I might be your interview for your future daughter.
You have to keep yours on. You have to keep yours on.
Oh, that's. I was just at a meeting.
We have to yell at you if your mask comes
Yeah,
off.
yeah. Where you go?
Anyway.
I know you saw it. Gave us a thumbs up, so you must be fine, because you tested before we.
Oh.
So we good.
What about this? What about?
Oh, well, that's a story that
Oh,
come on. I don't know whether he's gonna do it, but yeah, I think you should.
I should do it.
You know.
Okay. Just the document. So we can.
Oh, we get it when we come back.
Yeah, well, Steve just did. You totally understand.
Oh, we're not going to. Yeah. Right.
Right, I used to do
I
it.
think I'm gonna do this.
When I was
What
walking.
would you like?
Oh, with the.
Yeah.
Okay. I was out of town, I went to a meeting, a luncheon meeting. Well, it was like. Yes.
You can tell, see, you can tell she went to a meeting.
I'm all dolled up.
Real shoes.
Yeah, real honest to God, shoes. Yeah, let me tell you.
I didn't know you had a pair.
I know, I didn't either. Right, forgot.
Uh, Oh, yeah, okay.
And you could talk about what's there, so you will
Okay.
have to tell each one separately.
Everything's labeled, so it should be okay.
Okay. Okay, we're on. It's, and you hear me? They're all still talking. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I want to inform you that all three of us had to be tested before sitting up here, and that we're to yell at you if you don't have your mask on. So, so if we stop everything and okay, I want to introduce Carola and David Bamberger, and you can hear their life story. So which one would like to start telling where you came from?
Mike. I'm originally from London, England, and have been living here now 57 years, I think, since we got married. So I really am more of an American than a Brit. One of the questions was, what interested me as a child? That my biggest joy as a child was that I did ballet. I did ballet for many, many years. And I started when I was 3 and into my late teens, I danced, and that was everything to me. I'm not sorry I didn't go into it professionally. It's a very hard life, and to do anything but be in the corps de ballet, which is an even harder life. I didn't really want to do that, but that was my great love of growing up.
Now, when I was 3, I said to my mother, people shouldn't tell me what to do. I should tell people what to do. And being a stage director is a socially acceptable way of being a 3-year-old. So I have managed, like Peter Pan, never to grow up.
Okay, tell us a little bit about the beginnings of your life, you know, before this professional part started.
I did ballet. I went to school and I did ballet, and I went to classes and took ballet exams. But that really was my life. We actually, the school that I attended in London, not only was one of the leading schools, teaching schools, but we also did a full-scale ballet every year in a theater, not just in the dance studio. And so I had a lot of experience performing in that way.
And did you say you started at 3?
Yes, the nursery school that I went to had movement classes for 3-year-olds, which were beginnings of ballet. And so I was fortunate enough to do that and just fell in love with it and just kept going with the same teacher that came to the nursery school. And there were other teachers in her school, but we became lifelong friends. And in fact, when one of our trips to England, Stella was 99 or 100 at the time. We had the opportunity to get together with her for a cup of coffee, and she chastised me very severely for not having gone into it professionally. But that's another story.
Now the 99-year-old was the one you knew since you were 3?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
David, you want to?
Oh, well, and I've been doing theater as long as I can remember, but the other great love I had in my life was, as my young life was Boy Scouts. And I did just about everything that one can do in the Boy Scouts, Eagle Scout and World Jamboree and many, many things. So that was great fun.
And he got to meet President Eisenhower, report to the Nation Explorer.
The 12 Scouts for picture representing the whole country to meet the president and deliver the annual report of the Boy Scouts to him in the White House. So that was fun, but even more fun was we then toured around the group and went to the movies someplace. And in those days, there were newsreels. Remember newsreels? And there we were, walking into the White House, right on that screen up there.
And you didn't know it was going to be on a
I
newsreel.
didn't know. And then this kind of life repeated itself because I mentioned this story to one of my friends and he found it on YouTube. So all of a sudden I'm immortal. What can I say?
You want to tell us how the two of you met?
I had been studying my junior year in Paris, and then my parents were going to a conference in London, and we were literally going to pass each other in mid-Atlantic, and they said, "Don't do that. Come to London, and we'll go to the conference together." I could be a junior delegate, and then we'd go traveling together. Well, that was not a difficult offer to accept. And at the conference, Corolla was doing some press work or running in the days when to get things to Fleet Street, you actually had to carry it there as opposed to email or fax or anything. So she was doing a variety of things among the youth group. And there was a wine and cheese do that they did for the youngins, and that's where we met. And we then worked together off and on for that whole week of the conference. And then I went back to school or first off with my parents and then back to my senior year. We corresponded for 4 years. She had met my parents a couple of times in between, but we hadn't seen each other. And she came to America nominally to see some relatives, and also
Nominally.
and not nominally to see if she could get me out of her mind. How foolish. So instead, the day before she went back to London, we got engaged, and 3 weeks later we got married.
What were you doing in France? Why France?
Well, that's a longer story than you want, but the gist of it was that I was studying French.
Oh,
So it's a little more complicated than that, but that's what I was doing.
okay. So do you have children?
We have one child, a son, who lives here in Los Gatos. In fact, if we walk real fast, we can do it in 10 minutes. And if it's a 1 minute drive, and he lives there with our granddaughter. And so even though we had been living in Ohio, when David decided it was time to slow down directing, we picked up and moved out here.
And you have your grandchild goes to the school across
Across the street, yes. It's really hard.
So tell us, I don't know which one wants to tell how you got involved in opera and
as you have heard, we got married rather quickly. No,
I didn't know about that.
well, 3 weeks we were engaged, a 3-week engagement, so I think that's pretty quick. Only one person asked her whether she had to get married. Obviously, in England, they don't teach biology very well. Anyway, Gilbert and Sullivan has been sort of the theme of the leitmotif, if you can say that, of my career, because it was the first show I ever saw. Was a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta in New York. And then I got to know the New York G&S company very, very well. And then I got a job with them. And there was a man who was singing with that company who also was singing at the New York City Opera. And he heard there was an opening on the directing staff, and he'd asked me if I'd be interested in being recommended for that. So I said, yeah, sure, of course. So I had seen a lot of opera, but I think I directed one or two before this had happened. So anyhow, should I tell the John White story? Yes. Tell the John White story. Okay, so I got a call. John White, who is the second person in the company. There's general director, but John was Lord High everything else. So he called me. The whole leadership of the New York City Opera were Austrians who had gotten out during World War II or immediately before World War II. So he said, Mr. Bamberger, yes, you were recommended by Mrs. So-and-so. I said, no, I was recommended by Mr. Yule. Yeah, Mr. Yule. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bamberger. So that was about the length of my interview. So I figured that wasn't going to go anywhere. So a few weeks later, I get a call, Mr. White would like to see you again. Okay, I went down to the New York City Opera. Mr. Bamberger, yes, you were recommended by Mrs. So-and-so. No, by Mr. Yule. Yes, that's right, Mr. Bamberger. So I went to the theater that night, and Mr. Yule, Don Yule, said to me, congratulations. I said, for what? He said, you got the job. I said, that's the first I've heard of it. He said, you'll hear. So a couple of weeks later, we came home from something, and there was an envelope outside the door of our apartment, and that was my first contract with the New York City Opera. And that was the glory days when Sills was becoming a star and Domingo was becoming a star and all of that. So it was a very heady time.
And Carilla, how about you? How did you, did you already say that?
I had no involvement with opera. I had been to one opera. My father had taken me. My dad was terrific in that way. He felt, even though we didn't have a whole lot of money, he wanted me to be exposed to a whole variety of things so that if it hit me as I was getting older, or I dated somebody or whatever it was, I would know what they were talking about. And he did that with food. I had my first artichokes at home. My dad had bought one so that my brother and I could try asparagus. So it was pretty amazing. But no, I got into opera really got into opera when I assisted at the New York City Opera. I assisted David when he directed there. And I did some other work, office work at the opera, but I was never deeply involved in opera before that.
You're not going to sing for us or anything?
No.
Guaranteed that neither of us will be singing for you.
What did you have to do with Cleveland Opera?
Well, I had been teaching in the opera department at Oberlin College, which is just outside of Cleveland, and also directed some other things. And a man who was from Detroit, had been just transferred from Detroit, was disappointed to see that whereas they had by that time, 4 or 5-year-old opera company in Detroit, there wasn't any opera in Cleveland. And he then left me a note that said, if you'd be interested in starting an opera company, give me a call. So I did, and we chatted. And then we went and talked to a lot of people. Now, mind you, I was from New York, Carolla's from London, and he was from Detroit. So we didn't know anybody or anything about Cleveland, really. And that seemed a good qualification. And in addition to which, we didn't have any money. We were in academia, and John, although he was an attorney, was a corporate attorney of a lower level. So with having no money and no contacts and no information about the community seemed about the right way to get together to put on an opera company. So we talked to a lot of people, And they all said, gee, great idea. And nobody offered us a dime. And at this point, it was a little, this non-existent opera company owed us several $100s because we'd taking people to lunch and printing stationery. So my mother thought I had a job and that sort of thing. So finally, we got to the point where if we were going to continue with the whole project, we'd have to apply to the Ohio Arts Council for a grant. And if we were going to do that, we had to be incorporated. Now, John was an attorney, so he would do the paperwork. That was no problem. But in addition, there was a filing fee of $25. And at that point, even Corolla and I could have afforded $25, but we also felt there was a point where you have to stop throwing good money after bad, you know? So we said to John, we really didn't want to put up that money. And he said, well, if you guys want to keep doing the work, I'll put up the $25. And 25 years later, we had a $7 million budget and we're putting on the 3 tenors.
And Corolla, what were you doing all this time?
I was co-founder of the company.
Okay.
So we had separate responsibilities, but we worked on the whole thing from day one together. Fundraising, marketing. He did the casting and the directing. That was his baby.
And she did all the numbers and the paperwork and left me.
I had to learn nonprofit accounting.
And then
That
I
was-
learned, yeah. And she wanted to be sure that if the newspaper review said it was something was lousy, that the name before Bamberger was David.
And what was your son doing all this time?
We were really lucky. There were really only 2 choices because we were putting so much time into the opera company. Either our son was going to regard the opera company as his evil brother who had to be destroyed, or he was going to decide that he was part of the enterprise. And fortunately, we just got lucky and he became very much integrated into the company, doing, you know, folding envelopes in the early days, but then he was also of the generation where only teenagers knew how to run computers. And so he became, at the age of 14 or thereabouts, the computer guru for the opera company. And he set up a lot of the programs and worked with me for a very sophisticated cash flow program. And so we were very fortunate that he was very, very involved from day one.
And how are you involved then in the Cleveland Opera? What were some of the highlights?
How many people here know, if I talk about the Police, the rock group, the Police and Stuart Copeland, how many of you have any idea what I'm talking about? Okay, we won't tell you that story then.
You can leave.
Well, I'll be happy to tell you the story, but clearly, well, of course, the 3 tenors concert, we had 2 solo concerts with Pavarotti, and then had the whole team in Cleveland Brown Stadium for a very fancy show and do benefit dinners, and it was raised well, netted $4 million on the enterprise. So that was nice. We did a lot of different works. We covered really the whole repertoire of opera repertoire, from brand new operas to all the way back to the time of Handel, and Handel in particular, Monteverdi. We collaborated with a Canadian company on Baroque opera. So we got to do some really nice things. Some of the best stories come out that we decided to do classic musicals, 1 classic musical a year in addition to the operas that we did. And well, should I tell them? Well, oh, the Naughty Marietta story, that's a good one. Naughty Marietta is really an operetta. And we did the full range of musical theater. When I grew up, two things, I felt very strongly that opera ought to be theatrically viable, that people ought to look like they should look, the characters should look, and we performed it originally in English, and then we introduced super titles to Cleveland so that people always knew what was going on. One of my frustrations, I remember very clearly, my early operas that my parents took me to, and the audience was laughing when I didn't know what was going on because they were singing in Italian. So we didn't have that situation at Cleveland Opera. Anyhow, we did the full range of musical theater. People asked me what opera it was. I never did know that anyway. But I know what musical theater is, and we covered the full range. And so anyhow, the girl who was supposed to sing Marietta arrived sick, the title role, and we had somebody else who was to stand in for the rehearsals. And ultimately, the girl who was supposed to do the role never didn't recover, had to go home. And the girl who was the understudy had went on a few hours' notice. And had a great success, and everybody was cheering her on the sort of 42nd Street musical, you know, where the understudy becomes the star. Now, I give you a bit of a secret about this, and that is that we were going to tour this production, and this girl who was the understudy in Cleveland was going to do those roles on tour. The role on tour. So although it was true that she had only a few hours notice that she was going on, our press release was honest. It was also true that she had been highly motivated to really learn the show because she was going to be doing it. So that was all fine. So she had a big success. Everybody's happy. We go home, all is well. And we get a call early the next morning. Now, Naughty Marietta, like many of the operettas, have two couples, a comic couple and a romantic couple. So Marietta is of the romantic couple, and of the comic couple, this man had gone home after the performance, had put the wrong eye drops in his eyes for contact solution. Woke up the next morning in agony because his corneas were all scratched. We got him to an eye doctor who gave him anesthetic drops that he could use as often as he wanted, but they'd run at about 15 minutes and then he'd have to get squirted again. His mother was coming down from Michigan to see that night's performance, and we were sold out. And I said to the conductor, I might have had thought about canceling a performance if we didn't have a Marietta, but there is no way we are refunding there were 4 performances that weekend. There's no way we were going to refund 4 performances for the comic. So I said, if you see me out there, you just keep waving your hands because we are going on. But somehow this guy got through. We had a person assigned to him whenever he came off stage. She would be there with the eye drops, and we got him through the performance. So that was an adventure. One other story I ought to tell you is the first time we did Aida a couple of times, and we had an elephant and camel and the whole shebang. In fact, horses. And in fact, no one ever asked me who was singing the leading roles. They said, you're doing Aida? You're going to have an elephant? Yes. Where can I get tickets? No one ever asked me who was singing. The world is a very funny place. So anyhow, a friend of mine, our son, had a boa constrictor. And I thought, well, that would be exciting to have a boa. So we got clearance from the place where we were renting the animals. Yeah, they didn't care. And he was a very well-built young man, so we figured he's walking across with a. Anyhow, I mentioned this on the radio, a radio interview. By the time I got back to the office, there were calls from 4 trustees or their wives saying, we cannot be in a theater with a snake. No way, we cannot do it. Well, this was not a hill that I wanted to die on, so we called the young man, told him he was fired, but I figured I was going to get some mileage out of it. So we sent out a press release saying people are always looking for the correlation between being interested, people who are interested in X that are also interested in Y. And we had discovered that people who are interested in opera don't like snakes. So the snake had been fired. He would not be available for interviews. But if anybody didn't like, and then we went through the whole menagerie of the elephants and camels and that was too bad. They were going on. And P.S. that press release was picked up by USA Today. Was the first national publicity we got was for an event that didn't happen. Namely, that snake, he got us our first national press. World is very funny.
You have anything to add to that? Okay. How do you follow that, huh? Did you do any Broadway musicals?
Yeah, well, in addition to the operettas, we did musicals. We did one classic musical a year until Broadway started reviving them and going on tour. And then we had an adventure on that one too. I'll just tell you that we had a number of adventures, but the really exciting thing was when we did My Fair Lady. And there'll never be a production of My Fair Lady like the one we did, because the original music director conducted, the original dance captain staged, and the costumes we got were from Cecil Beaton from the movie, insured for $1 million and looking radiant. And they were out here or in Los Angeles, people had, taken whatever pictures they needed, and then they'd taken these costumes and stuck them in a warehouse and unair conditioned. So when I sent out my costumer to get the costumes we needed for the show, some of it, she would touch the hanger and the whole thing would dissolve. But we were able to get enough costumes. Obviously, they used a lot more costumes for the movie than we needed for the stage. And we had a whole team of people repairing the costumes backstage, because whenever the ladies particularly took off a gown, it had a rip somewhere, but man, it looked spectacular. And those costumes are gone, It's been a long time since then. So it was pretty special.
Carola, can you get a word in now about that you were
So you could tell by your
Oh, no, there are too many stories to tell. Yeah,
that you were ahead of your time advocating for accessibility to the arts.
yes. After the opera company had been running a few years, we were getting so big that we needed a new facility to meet in another facility. And at the same time, the foundations in Cleveland were working with an organization called Playhouse Square, which is the largest theater complex outside, I think, of Washington, and has 4 theaters, beautiful old movie palaces, gorgeous on the inside. Anyway, they were going to be refurbished, all the beautiful gold work and floral work, and was going to be refurbished. And they were putting in new seats for one of the theaters to become a permanent home for the opera company and for Cleveland Ballet. And we were looking at the designs for this. Now, you have to remember, this was a theater that had 3,000 seats. So it was not a dinky little thing, 3,000 seats. And I looked at the plans, and there was a wheelchair, a room for one wheelchair here, one wheelchair on the other side, and then at the very back, one wheelchair and another wheelchair on the other side. And we met with the people at Playhouse Square and we said, look, this isn't going to work. You can't possibly have a 3,000 seat, fully refurbished theater and not have more room for wheelchairs. So they played with that a bit. In the meantime, I held a conference in Cleveland, bringing in specialists from around the country to come and talk. I don't know how many of you remember, but in the 80s, they came out with the new accessibility laws, 504 accessibility laws. And it said you had to make your facility accessible to everybody. Theater people were absolutely panicked because accessibility not only meant seating, but accessibility meant language, visual stuff, hearing. Who was going to pay for this? I mean, this is a lot of money that people were talking about. Anyway, I brought these specialists in and they said, no. If you've got a Hungarian community and you're doing an operetta, just write up, have somebody write the synopsis in Hungarian for you. Hand it out if anybody wants it. No, you don't have to suddenly have people singing in Hungarian as well. So there were lots of little things that people were able to do. Well, to go back to the theater, they finally did figure out that they really needed to remove one whole row of seats, put in nice chairs, and then be able to remove those chairs if they had people with in wheelchairs. And so we ended up with a theater that could accommodate just about anybody. We had a Sennheiser hearing system for those of you who have hearing impairment. It's like a little headset that you put on. It's infrared. It picks up and enhances the sound from the stage for you. We had audio description, which was for the visually impaired, somebody in the back of the theater who was in a booth, a plexiglass booth, and would describe in between musical numbers what was happening visually. So Lucia comes, you might say, Lucia is walking down the stairs. She's covered in blood and she looks really desperate. And then Lucia would do her aria. So it created a visual picture for people who were just hearing the show. So it was things like that. And I was fortunate in, I think it was 1986, to receive the Arts Access Award because of all the work that Cleveland Opera had done to make the performance accessible to the whole community, one way or another.
David, have you done any publishing?
Well, I've written an awful lot of things for the opera company, but I have a whole other side of my life, which is writing textbooks for Jewish religious schools. I've been involved in, Carol and I are both involved in Judaism all our lives. And it's a whole long story, but the short version is I wrote 4 books, 2 as a general history of the Jewish people, 1 on, I called A Young Person's History of Israel, you have over there on the display table, and another book called Judaism and the World's Religions. So when I had nothing else to do, I was writing books. It was fun, learned a lot.
Do you want to tell about what you have on the table over there?
Well, we have the first poster for Cleveland Opera's first year. We have pictures of us with Pavarotti and the tenors. We have, they're all labeled. There's a costume sketch for a Lucia del Amor that I did in Chile. Forget what, I'd have to look to remember. Oh,
Picture of our granddaughter.
picture, yes, the important one, that's with our granddaughter. But they're all labeled, so you can, so an award, we get the award that Corolla referred to, and another award that the two of us got from local arts magazine. I forget, but take a look. It's kind of interesting. We like it.
Any questions that you might have?
Yes, sir. The aforementioned son and granddaughter. After we left, is this on? When we left the opera company, wasn't the plan, but the local conservatory, the Cleveland Institute of Music. Oh, there's a picture there from where we got honorary doctorates from them, from the Cleveland Institute of Music. When that happened, it was not anticipated that they would ask me to run the opera department, but they did. And I thought, well, for a year or two, what the hey. 14 years later, we decided it was time to come out here and be near our son and granddaughters.
What about the terraces? How did you?
Well, we looked around and we fell in love with the terraces, like everybody else here, I imagine, right? Everybody we've spoken to says, oh yes, we've looked at a lot of places and boy, are we glad we got in here. So we joined the chorus.
Did you know anyone here?
No.
And I bet you don't know anyone still. Oh, no.
No, you guys have been.
I mean, you're so shy, both of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we do the best we can. You guys have been really so warm and welcoming, and it's been great.
Okay, so then if you want to come up and look at what's here and, I'm
We
sorry.
got Bruce.
Just a bit of curiosity's sake, what is your favorite opera and your favorite aria?
Well, the line I usually say is that my favorite opera is the one I'm working on. I've kind of avoided coming up with a better answer to that. I've done a lot of, I think one of my favorite productions that I've done has been called an opera called Xerxes by Handel. Some of you may know Handel's Largo. If you've ever heard of that, it actually comes from an opera. And it was presents a really great challenge for an opera stage director, because the first thing that happens is that the Emperor Xerxes comes in and looks at a tree and says, boy, you're a beautiful tree. And then he goes into sleep under the beautiful tree. And a girl is looking at a window, out a window, and sees him and sings an aria. So as written, you're stuck with a tree in the middle of the stage and then a wall for a house with a window. So this did not seem to me a way to make Baroque opera exciting. So did two things. One was created a chorus there's a chorus in the show, but I used them to be whatever I wanted them to be. So in the very first scene, they were the tree. And then they became whatever else I needed every time the scene changed. And the other thing was I imagine Home Depot, you know, those ladders that go up and roll around. Well, I mean, we made two of those and so that they could move and be wherever I wanted. So in this gal comes up the back of the stairs, that she's in a window, then she's going to sing an aria. The choristers turn the ladder, she comes down, sings the aria to the audience, goes back up and back up to her window. So I could be as flexible as I wanted with everything. So that was really fun to do, really unusual. And to get a review from a nasty reviewer who said, who could ever have imagined that Handel would be such fun? That was very satisfying.
Anyone else?
No more questions. We could tell the Man of the Mancha story.
We have time. No, go.
You want another story?
Okay with me.
Okay. Well, we were doing Man of La Mancha, and one of these opera classic musicals that we did, and we had an opening night and the opening weekend, big success. Was beautiful. I didn't direct that production. Beautifully done, big success. So we get back to the second weekend, Friday night. I'm just standing back there thinking of nice thoughts about how lovely the music is, when a girl comes over to me. She says, our Aldonza, you know the story, Man of La Mancha, we've got Don Quixote running around doing strange things, and anyway, the female lead, doesn't matter, she can't sing. So what do you mean she can't sing? Her voice is gone. Well, apparently what had happened was that she had to scream at one point. There's some violence, sex and violence going on. And whatever she did, she literally sprained her vocal cord. So we had waited. It was fortunately this was late in the second act, and we were able to get through in various ways and finish the performance. Meanwhile, Carolla has gotten our voice doctor on the phone. Can you open up your practice and see this gal? She can't speak. Fine. So fortunately, Man of La Mancha is a relatively short show. So it was now what, maybe 10 o'clock?
Oh,
The-
it was like 10, 10:30, 11, 10:30, 11, we were there.
Anyhow, we got to the doctor. He said, "Oh, she's going to be fine." I said, "Phew." He says, "The only thing she can't do is sing or talk for the next 3 weeks." I said, "What are you talking about?" "Oh, she's going to be fine." He showed us this cute little picture of her vocal folds, and there was a little bruise. And he said, "That's going to go away, but it's going to be like if you have an athlete who sprains his ankle and you rest it, it'll be fine. But if you just keep using it, not going to be a good result." So can she go on stage? Oh, sure, she can go on stage. She can do anything except she can't sing or talk. Okay. So we had singers from all over the country, and somebody knew somebody who had once sung it for the director. Anyhow, where was this person that I found? In San Diego. It's a long way. So I call her up. This is now 11 o'clock in Cleveland time, but 8 o'clock here. "What are you doing this weekend?" "Nothing planned." "How would you like to come to Cleveland?" "Fine." There was one seat left on a direct flight from Cleveland that would get us to Cleveland at 6 o'clock for an 8 o'clock performance. Now, there was never any possibility that she could go on stage, but the girl who couldn't sing was wanted to be on stage. And the musicals were mic'd. We didn't mic the operas, but the musicals were all mic'd as a Broadway style. So that wasn't going to be a problem. We put her in a place right next to the conductor. So the gal on stage was following the beat, and the gal in pit was singing. No problem. But there's also dialogue. So they were amazingly, they were very close, synced up for the very first performance. But by the last performance of the four, they were 100% together, and neither of them was doing their own performance. They merged somehow into a unified timing that was absolutely perfect and was not exactly what either of the other did in her own performance. And they had no idea how that happened. It was just extraordinary. And we announced what was going on. And there was a substitute. I mean, we weren't keeping any secrets, but people came up to us afterwards and said, "Now, which was the one who had a replacement?" Because it was so good that but they couldn't tell. So that was one of our many. But the other thing was, while I'm in Land of La Mancha, my heroic wife, you have to understand that in a professional theater, no one touches the scenery, no one touches the props except the stagehands. Partly a union rule to protect their jobs, but also they're protecting the equipment of the theater. They're the ones that are responsible. You don't touch them, period. That's the way it is. So in Man of La Mancha, there's a ladder, a staircase that keeps coming up and down because we're in a prison cell. So these things come up and down. And everything, again, this time Corolla was backstage having a good time, enjoying the show. When we're getting to a place where the ladder is supposed to go down and the stagehand was not there. And my wife very courageously, because he pulled the rope, got somebody to help her, and they pulled the rope down to make the ladder go down. And the guy who had been drinking or whatever he was doing lost his job, and they never said a word to Corolla complaining about her having touched the scenery.
So every time this ladder, this staircase came down, it was probably 30 feet. I mean, and somebody, as it came down, was almost down, somebody was coming down the staircase. So if it wasn't there, that was really bad. And then obviously in the other direction, you had to wait until the staircase was down to come up. But in this particular case, somebody was going to be going down the stairs. You know, what do you do in the middle of a performance when the staircase has to go down? So no, we were very lucky. We had a wonderful relationship with the stagehands. Not everybody does. They have a tough job, and people don't always treat them with respect. That was a rule in our company, that everybody got treated with respect. Everybody had a job to do, and if they didn't do their job, I mean, just think, if he had done it on purpose, this guy, I mean, he was just badly behaved, but that you have a real problem. Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed that cue. You know, they can destroy a performance. So you have to be nice to everybody.
Okay, well, let's wind it up then come up and see all the good things on the table, and they'll be there to explain to you. Oh, would you also wait? I'm supposed to tell you to keep your masks on, please. Keep your masks on. Yeah, we got tested before we came up here.
Thank you. I feel like I've been to theater. It's lovely. Thank you. It was. Very much. Yep. You know, I kept thinking, when I first met you, you remember that, I remember that distinctly. You were eating with us and you didn't say a word. And I thought, gosh, you must be so shy.
Oh, yeah.
What? You just didn't want to talk to me. That was the problem.
Lured me into putting on a Passover Seder. So
You were what?
I say I was afraid you were going to lure me into putting on a Passover Seder.
I did. You were the best that ever.
I was not a traffic.
Oh, listen, that's
Well,
super,
okay,
yeah.
now I worked, I did 5 operas with Fort Worth Opera Company.
Oh, my goodness, David directed.
Did you direct in Fort Worth?
Yeah, I directed.
When?
A long time ago.
Well, I was there a longer time ago than you. I was there in the late forties. The job